Shade is one of the most interesting, yet underrated and underplayed brawlers in the game. In this video, I'm going to take a look at Shade's basics, then analyze him further, talking about how his design has caused him to become a very niche brawler, but very good at his specific niche. Talking about his uncanny similarity to Jackie, as well as talk about his unique relationship to throwers, and more. If you want a chance to win Persephone Lumi, or simply just have fun and a place to talk, join our Discord server. Link will be in the description. Also, make sure to subscribe to keep up with the PowerPoints. First, let's go over his stats. Shade has an above average health at 7000 and has a very fast movement speed. His main attack is quite interesting and swings his arms in sort of a semicircle that has an attack delay like BB and Frank. The attack deals 1600 damage, but if you hit an enemy in the middle of the attack, it deals 3200 damage. And the attack can also go through walls. Shade also has two traits. The radius trait, similar to Buzz and Lily, which allows him to charge his super within a 6-tile radius, and the walk on water trait, which allows him to make Eve feel even worse about herself. Now, his super. Shade's super is basically just a short dash that lets him now travel through walls, gaining a 30% movement speed increase for a total of 6 seconds. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about this silly pile of clothes. As we can see based on his design, he is obviously curated to be a brawler that relies heavily on walls, but at a short range. His main attack can go through them, but it only has a range of 3.67 tiles. His super also allows him to go through walls and basically be invulnerable inside of them, but he needs to move out of the walls in order to actually damage enemies. I mean, come on, Shade can be described in just one sentence. Assassin that needs walls and short range to thrive. Actually, that describes a lot of brawlers, so let me just move on quietly. I mean, Shade is as close to a specialist as you can get with a brawler, as his niche is extremely well defined and closed off, with the closest and only other brawler in his niche being Jackie, which I'll touch on more later. With this classification and knowledge of his stats, we can see just how much Brawl Stars has zeroed him in on this niche. I mean, he's genuinely useless on basically every open map in the game, simply because of how over-reliant he is on walls. I mean, the existence of walls are the only thing that makes Shade stand out. Like, why pick Shade on a map even moderately open when other, less niche, and more usable assassins exist? His reliance on walls, combined with his extremely short range, cause him to basically be a sitting duck on any remotely open map. So that's where his super and his supercharged trait come in. Since Shade has such a short range, it's vital for him to get his super in another way, like other short range brawlers like Lily and Buzz, leading to him having the supercharged circle. However, this actually sort of reinforces his reliance on walls, and doesn't make him that much better on open maps. Why? Well, the main issue is that the supercharged radius is only 6 tiles, which isn't big at all, and you don't want to be in dangerous situations out in the open just so you can charge your super. However, as we know, the supercharged circle goes through walls, which helps out Shade even more. He can hide behind walls and gain important supercharge. But you may ask, can he do the same thing with his main attack? Well, the difference is the circle extends a seemingly insignificant, but nonetheless very important 2.33 tiles, allowing him more range to work with when trying to get his super. However, his super is where his reliance on walls, quite paradoxically, isn't as big of a factor. The main selling point of the super is that it allows you to go through walls, but while yes, that's very important, that's not actually as important as the speed boost it gives you. Basically every brawler that has a short range has some sort of an approach tool to get closer to enemies. And while yes, Shade has a very fast movement speed, it's not exactly enough to qualify as an actual approach tool. But that all changes with the insane speed boost that he receives with his super. This actually allows him to be a genuine threat to enemies that are far away, as he'll easily be able to dodge shots and move across the map quickly, finally allowing him to no longer rely on walls, simply because of how fast he is in his super. Taking all of this into consideration, let's talk a bit about his matchups, and specifically the thrower matchup. He has a bit of a unique situation when it comes to his relationships towards throwers. At the same time, he both hard counters them, yet they are, at times, the only brawlers that can counter Shade. Remember when I mentioned that Shade relies heavily on walls and often is found hiding behind them? Well, guess who loves throwing attacks over walls? You guessed it, the artillery class. The thing with throwers is that they can force Shade out of his comfort zone with their attacks, and then leave the rest to their teammates. So in other words, with a full team, throwers can do pretty good in pressuring Shade into returning back to non-sentience. However, things can change drastically in one-on-one scenarios. The biggest problem for throwers is Shade's very fast movement speed. It's extremely hard to reliably hit him, as Shade will probably just dodge each shot. But it gets much worse and much more dangerous when he uses his super. The 30% movement speed alone is enough to make any thrower, let's not finish that sentence actually. But even worse than that is Shade's ability to go through walls in his super. Suddenly, he can fight back against the throwers who were previously safe, going through walls to fight them. Combine this with the extra movement speed, and you suddenly have a basically unkillable threat, leading to Shade having both a very favorable matchup against throwers, but at the same time a not very favorable matchup, if that makes any sense. I've talked a lot about Shade's weaknesses in open maps, so let's switch it up and talk about where he's good at. And to absolutely no one's surprise, it's closed maps with a lot of walls. For example, let's take a look at something like Canal Grande. There are a few defining features: water, very closed map, and very important walls. Just by this, you can tell Shade is licking his lips on this map. The bushes allow him to stay hidden, and the close proximity of all the walls cause it to be a very closed map, which in other words means that enemies have to get close to Shade, which in other words means Shade can easily charge up his super. Furthermore, his attack can actually hit enemies through walls consistently on this map, which usually isn't the case. Finally, Shade's ability to walk on water actually comes into use here, as he can use the forbidden third lane of water, allowing him more movement than basically the rest of the cast in the map. All in all, Shade's design allows him to be an absolute unit on closed maps overall, but Canal Grande especially. Another brawler that is or was very good on Canal Grande was Jackie, who I did a whole analysis on, but that's beside the point. You wouldn't think Jackie and Shade have a lot in common, but they actually kinda do. First and most obvious is their attack. Both of their attacks are of a very short range and go through walls. Their attacks both are usually not used to attack through walls due to their very short range, other than in use cases like the aforementioned Canal Grande. They have a few more similarities, like the importance that speed boosts have for them with Jackie's gadget and Shade's super. Also, they both have an unorthodox way of gaining their super, due to their short range with Jackie's tank trait and Shade's supercharge radius. However, their real similarity lies within their niche. They both are often seen on the same sort of maps, closed maps with a whole ton of walls in them. Examples include, of course, the aforementioned Canal Grande, but also maps like Triple Dribble pinball dreams, and parallel plays that all rely on playing around walls and taking advantage of them, which both Jackie and Shade do. Of course, it's not a completely one-to-one similarity between the two. The main difference, of course, being the fact that Shade is played more like an assassin with more careful gameplay, while Jackie is a tank and has a different playstyle as a result of that. Furthermore, their super differs quite a bit, with Jackie relying a lot on pulling enemies towards her, while Shade is the opposite, going towards enemies rather than bringing enemies towards him. But overall, they are quite similar brawlers when it comes to the niche they reside in. Now, let's talk about Shade's unlockables, starting off with his gadgets. His first gadget is Long Arms, which sees Shade's main attack range increase by 1.67 tiles. This is actually a very important gadget for Shade, and lets him negate his biggest weakness, his lack of range. Even better, this helps him to charge a super as well, so overall, a very good gadget for him. Shade's second gadget is Jumpscare, which sees Shade create a 3.33 tile radius of ghosts, which slows enemies down by 20% for 4 seconds. This is a mediocre star power. The range it has is pretty underwhelming and is only useful for when Shade is actually near an enemy. However, the slow it has allows Shade to better aim his critical hits, prevent enemies from running away, or just run away himself. However, I would still say the other gadget is much better. Shade's first star power is Spooky Speedster, which sees Shade's movement speed increase by 15% after hitting an enemy in the center of a hug. This is also quite a mediocre star power. Shade already has a very fast movement speed, and the 15% isn't that huge of a difference. Furthermore, if Shade is close enough to an enemy to get the crit, does he really need the extra movement speed as well? Shade's second star power is Hardened Hoodie, which sees Shade get a 30% damage reduction while in its super form. This is a solid star power and it gives Shade extra survivability. You might argue that the speed boost alone should give Shade enough survivability, but against brawlers like other assassins or other tanks that don't rely as much on aiming, this extra damage reduction is vital for survival. Finally, his Hypercharge. Shade's Hypercharge is quite simple, with all shots being crits. For obvious reasons, this is a very strong Hypercharge, as it allows him to deal 4,000 damage per shot without even thinking or aiming properly, which is also a nice metaphor for the addition of Hypercharges. Even worse is how easy it is to charge up. You literally only need to charge up 2 Shade Supers to get the Hypercharge, which is ridiculously fast. Combined with how strong Shade's Hypercharge is, you can see why this is one of the most underrated yet broken Hypercharges in the game. Overall, Shade is one of the most interesting brawlers in the game. His unique gameplay around walls and his aversion for open spaces lend himself to a very interesting and unique niche, one that is very similar to Jackie. Furthermore, it gives him interesting interactions with throwers, which at the same time he hard counters but is also somehow countered by. But anyway, thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.